thank you, and good morning to you all. I'm presenting on the topic this morning of success in business and life, and in many ways it's kind of an audacious statement to be making, but I hope you'll enjoy what I have to share. You mentioned I have 3 kids, Brandon, Jessica, and Daniel, and my middle daughter, Jessica, is 26 and married. My boys aren't married yet. And so my wife and I have kind of adopted some other young couples who have families. And we serve as kind of like a mentor to them and helping them with issues in parenting or just the relationship of marriage. And we had one of these young couples over to our house about 2 weeks ago, and they have 2 daughters. We kind of adopted them as our grandkids, so to speak. Madeline, who's 9, and Gracie, who's 7. Gracie's this little 7-year-old, precocious, short, blonde, straight hair, cute as she can be, always thinking. And we're having dinner, and there's a moment of silence after dinner. And Gracie said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to be rude, but this house is awfully large for just 2 people." And so, I thought about that. Of course, she said some other things since then that are even better, but that whole concept, to her, in her world, she saw this house, which is a big house. We raised 3 kids there, and compared to the house that they live in, our house is grandiose. So that made me think, well, does that mean success? If you asked Gracie what success means, this big house to her is nothing. It's the opposite of what success is. It's something that shouldn't even be there. Yet, when we think about success, often it's in terms of the things that can be obtained through financial accumulation. And at the end of the day, that's not necessarily what success is. So what is it? Is it having a big house? Is it having nice cars to drive? Is it, what is it? Well, let me ask you, what do you think of when you hear the word success? Anybody? I'm going to stand here until somebody says something. Okay, meeting your goals. Okay, good. Financial independence. That's a good answer. Yep. Good health. Yeah.
Making a difference in people's lives.
Okay, making a difference in people's lives. Very good. Yeah.
Balancing spiritual, professional, personal, and social.
Okay. Did you hear that? Balancing personal, professional, spiritual, and social. Yeah, very good. If you go to Google, by the way, and run a search on success, you'll get 393 million references to the word success. So there's many, many different definitions available to you out there. And I even went so far on your handout here to list 4 definitions of success. The favorable or prosperous termination of attempts or endeavors, the attainment of wealth, position, honors, or the like, a successful performance or achievement, as in the play was an instant success, a person or thing that is successful, as in she was a great success on the talk show. Well, I would submit to you that your answer to the question, what is success, is the most important question you can ask on this subject. And I want to offer to you this morning what I think is a very good working definition of success, and it's a very simple one. And that is, success is the feeling you get when you accomplish your priorities. So it's not a tangible thing per se. It's not. It's a moving target in many respects, and it's going to be different for every person. Success is just the feeling that you get when you accomplish your priorities. And this explains why one person who sets out a priority of growing their business 20% for a year, and they hit 25 can feel very, very good. Another person who says, hey, we're going to grow 50% this year, and they grow 45%, doesn't feel successful because it was simply a question of setting priorities and then meeting those priorities. And so when you realize that really success in and of itself is is nothing more than a feeling. You know, and we're a very success-obsessed society, and there are a lot of people who will try to offer you their definition of what success is. And our greatest problems that we have with this whole concept of success is that we too often have a tendency to slip into other people's definition of what success is. You don't have to spend much time being exposed to the media to see that there's plenty of people who are willing to offer you what a definition of success is. I was driving here this morning. There was a radio commercial that came on that was talking about, you want to be really successful in showing your love, then you should have your loved one come to our chiropractic clinic for a massage. Okay? So that word is going to be thrown around a lot out there. So if I asked you the question this morning, are you successful? How would you respond to that? How would you know whether you're successful or not? And again, if you have a vague response to that question, are you successful, it's probably because you have a vague idea about what success is for you. And again, the key thing here is not what everybody else determines success is for you. The key thing is what you determine success is for you. So how do you go about determining what's important to you or not? The real key is, Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, tells a story about a speaker who gets up and talks and says, okay, he's got this big jar, big glass jar, and he starts putting big boulder stones into this thing. And he fills up the glass jar with these big boulders. And he asks everybody, okay, is the jar full? And everybody says, yeah, the jar's full. And he goes, well, wait a minute. Comes out with some stones and starts dropping stones in that fall between the big rocks and says, okay, now is the jar full? Everybody goes, okay, now it looks like it's full. He says, nope, wait a minute. Comes out with some sand and pours sand in and says, now is it full? Nope, it's still not full. Finally, the guy comes and pours water into the jar and says, okay, now is the jar full? And unless somebody figures out some creative way to make water compress, now the jar is full. And what's the point of that whole story? The point of the story is that you've got to get things in the right order. If you start with the large boulders and try and put those in if you put those in last, you put the water in first and then the sand and then the small rocks, you will never fit everything into the jar. So the key concept here in terms of fitting things in is, number one, deciding what the boulders are that you need to put into the jar. And this little grid that I've given you here on the paper can help you with something that I guess I would call boulder level success, or boulder level focus, I'm sorry. So if you want to get the important things into your life or into your particular business unit, whatever the arena may be, you've got to start and understand what the boulders are. So how do you help to determine what those are? Well, this little grid is a very simple way of just saying, here's how you can start to kind of brainstorm this idea and really determining what the priorities are that you should have as you're facing whatever arena we may be talking about here, okay? And the neat thing about this is that it will apply pretty much across the board, whether you're talking about your family or whether you're talking about the operational unit of a company, sales and marketing, administration, any of the various pieces for a unit or a department or an entire company or a country for that matter. This little grid, if you just write a 1, 2, and 3 along the left-hand side of the paper, and then the columns you can title problems, goals, and opportunities. And let me just kind of share with you how this works. I went through this exercise not 2 or 3 weeks ago with my leadership team in my company. And I asked each one of the leaders of the functional area within my company to look at their particular area of the company and fill out this grid. So my operations guy, who is in charge of the hands-on, making sure that stuff happens on a day-to-day basis, came up with a list. It filled in the grid, all 9 squares. And I'll just share with you one of what he gave me, just as an example for you. Under problems, he wrote shrinking truck capacity. Okay, now, in my business, what that means is, we're a broker. We do freight transportation services, and we rely on purchasing our transportation services from trucking companies that are out there. We serve as a middleman, so to speak. And so, in the last couple of years, with the economy being what it is, a lot of trucking companies have gone out of business. And so there are far fewer trucks in the marketplace today than there were 2 years ago, and it's a pretty dramatic number. That, in combination with the fact that the economy is improving, means that this year we can see that we're heading for a perfect storm in terms of having available trucks, and it will mean rates are going to go up, and it's not looking like a fun year for us from that standpoint. So he identified that as really the number one problem that he faces on an operational basis, is having an adequate supply of trucks. From that, he comes up with a goal, which is to not just survive, but to build a stronger base of available trucks to us. Okay, so that just becomes a very simple goal. And then the opportunity that he saw, and by the way, these don't necessarily have to be related. Your problem and your goal and your opportunity are not necessarily going to be tied in directly together, but they can be, and in this case is. The opportunity he sees is that every broker and shipper faces the same problem. We'll solve it. Okay, so he comes up with a kind of a can-do opportunity or idea that says, hey, everybody has to live with the situation. We are going to be better and solve the problem. Now, on another level, I'll give you an example how I did it on a company-wide basis, because I'm interested not just in operations, I'm interested in the entirety of the company. And so my grid was this. My first one was that we have inadequate margin growth. My company, in terms of our margin, which is the difference between what we charge a customer and what we pay a carrier, our growth was about 6% last year. Now, in my economy, that is not adequate growth for a number of reasons, but the largest one of which is, with that kind of growth, I cannot get and keep the brightest and best talent because I cannot offer growth opportunities for my people. So it kills me as a business owner to see only a modest growth in our margin. And so the goal that I have for this year and beyond is to grow at a minimum of 20% sustainable over a 5-year period. Okay, that's going to be a huge chunk to bite off. And the opportunity, though, frankly, is that the economy is on the rise. I see it in a number of different areas across the board of the spectrum of all the customers that we deal with. It's pretty clear to me that the economy is picking up some steam, and we're already experiencing some very, very positive numbers for this year. So back to this whole idea, though. The idea, and that I think is a key one here, is you can take this concept of simply identifying problems, setting goals, and identifying opportunities, and you can apply it in a huge variety of arenas, as I said before. So it works, again, for a department. I don't know what all of the job functions are that are represented here this morning, but you can take it to any level. It's always better, though, I will say this, it's always better if you can start on the largest scale that you have under your control. Okay, now what do I mean by that? In the instance I just gave you, it's far easier and more understandable and helpful for my leadership team if ahead of time I have told them what I see the larger overarching problems, goals, and opportunities are. Because if I just ask them to do it without the context, of what's important to me as the business owner, then they may come up with some things that are completely irrelevant to the larger purpose that we have in mind. So if you start with the large and work your way down to the small, then it's your goals will be more in harmony, and you'll come up with the end results really that you're looking for. Now, I guess that makes good sense. I don't need to pound that issue anymore. To me, the real key part here too is not just doing this kind of process for your business, but if you really want to see success in life, then I would submit to you that you can't look at just the business part in isolation. You've really got to sit down and do some work using this grid, sitting down and doing a little dreaming on your own. You've got to do this work for your entire life, but it's exactly the same kind of a process. You can sit down and begin to dream a little bit for yourself, and maybe another way to do it, if you don't want to use this grid, would be to ask yourself the question, if I could only do 3 things sometime before I die, what would they be? What would the 3 things be that I would like to do or like to see sometime before I die? By the way, the reason that a lot of people aren't successful and don't feel successful is that they never take the time to sit down and go through a process like that. Again, for whatever area you may be talking about. Sitting down and doing this, dreaming a little bit, but most importantly, writing it down is by far the most significant step you will ever take towards achieving success, is sitting down and writing down your goals. And I'll tell you something else that's pretty obvious. It's work, okay? I'll be honest with you. It's hard work because you have to sit down and get rid of all the clutter and all the noise and really come down to what the essential and important things are in your life. So if you can do that for your life, then you can feel liberated, quite frankly, to take this and plug it into business, to plug it into a business you might own, to plug it into an apartment that you run. You might not even have somebody, a department that you're running. It may be just your own responsibilities within a business. But if you do it for your life, understand what the business is expecting, and then do this same process for your own responsibilities within your functional area in a company, then and only then does it really start to make sense. Now, some of those things you can't control, right? If the company says these are our priorities, you have to work within those. But your life plan, what you decide to do with your life, is over and above the company. The company does not control your life. You do. But like many other things, if you haven't firmly set your priorities and understand them, then the company will begin to dictate to you what your priorities are for your life. And you will begin to make sacrifices in other areas that maybe you never intended to do, and had you sat down and really thought about it and had it in writing, then you might not have gone that direction in the first place. I have just a real short story here I'd like to read you that illustrates this point pretty well. And this is, it's old, as I said, but it's nonetheless a good story. In 1977, so that gives you an idea how old, West German industrialist Friedrich Flick died. And he left a personal fortune estimated at $1.5 billion, which, that's not a lot of money today, right? $1977, that was a lot of money. A business empire that embraced all or part of 300 firms and a reputation as perhaps the crustiest, craftiest magnate ever to operate the German business scene. Flick was dedicated wholly to his work. He buried his wife at 3 p.m. one day in 1966 and was back at his desk 2 hours later. But unlike such German industrialists as Alfred Krupp, Robert Bosch, and Ernest von Siemens, he never really made anything. He simply put companies together. Quote, he always made the right moves, end quote, summed up one odd observer. He was the Bobby Fischer of the industrialist world. At his death, the Flick empire generated annual sales in excess of $3 billion. But for all his enormous power and wealth, the old man had one very human shortcoming. He could not control his family. By last week, a Flick family fight over Der Alter Herr's empire had employees, bankers, and politicians alike shuddering over the eventual impact it might have on the West German economy. That was out of Newsweek magazine, by the way. So here's a guy, Friedrich Flick, successful in monetary terms, on a whole nother level, had no success in his life whatsoever. So again, you have to sit down and say, what's important to me in life? Well, I would say 11 years ago, I really sat down for myself and decided for the first time to commit in writing my goals, my 3 things that I wanted to do before I died, and established what those were. And I did it in writing, and the value in that has been immeasurable in my life. Now, just to give you an example, my 3 goals that I set out for myself, 3 things I wanted to do sometime before I died. Number 1 was I wanted to launch all 3 of my kids into independent lives, serving their God and their community around them. Okay? So now my kids are 30, 20, 28, and 26. And I can check that one off. Now, it doesn't mean I'm done being a dad, but to me, in my life, that was a very, very important thing to be able to do. So that one's now checked off. The second one that I had was to build a sustainable business based on the highest principles and morals. And I wasn't too sure that I had this one until I survived 2009. When I survived 2009, I went, okay, if that's not sustainable, I don't know what is. Doesn't mean we're going to last forever, but I felt like, okay, success. There's that feeling, success. The third one was to build my marriage into a shining light that would attract people and inspire them to deeper relationships. Now that one's still on my list. Haven't quite achieved success on that one yet, and so that one has actually continued. I just sat down 2 weeks ago and reviewed my current list and really looked at those and said, okay, are those still true? Now, here's something else I would mention to you. One of the reasons that people don't like goal setting is that you can feel I guess unsuccessful sometimes, because if you set a certain goal, let's say, in an area you decide I want to get up to 500 million in sales, or I want to get up to an employee count of 50, or whatever the goal is, and if you hit 49 instead of 50, then you missed your goal and you weren't successful. So one of the things you need to keep in mind with goals is that they are simply a statement of priority. And you shouldn't be too hard on yourself if you don't achieve the exact goal number, okay? It's simply a statement of your priority. So feel free to set those goals. In fact, at this point, you probably realize that you were kind of tricked when you came here this morning. You came here under the guise of hearing something about success, and now really all you've heard me talk about so far is goal setting and priority setting and that kind of thing. And all I can tell you is you're right, because if I build this session as determining your priorities and setting goals, you probably wouldn't have come this morning. Well, maybe you would have. The key part about this is, though, to get it in writing. There is study after study that's been done that demonstrates the incredible power of simply getting things down in paper. And I cannot tell you how valuable it's been. Again, whether we're talking about my business or whether we're talking about life, to have those things written down before you. So if you take nothing else away from here this morning, please take this. Focus precedes success. You cannot be focused until you know what your priorities are. And it's very, very difficult to really remember and understand your own priorities if you don't write them down and go back and revisit them. Now, I personally have built a life, and my life goals and those things are built on my faith that I have in a God that's bigger than me, and I take a lot of my keys for what dictates success in my life from the Bible, and I do that unashamedly because I believe that is a written document that provides a basis for the entirety of life. So as you sit down and really think about, well, what am I basing my life on? Where do I take my cues from? I really would encourage you to consider that as a valid and really dynamic option for you in setting your whole life goals. So I think how am I doing on time? We're about there. I will take questions if you have any at this point.
Could you repeat the third goal?
Oh, the third goal I have is to build my marriage into a shining light that will attract people and inspire them in relationships. Good question.
Did you get help from your wife, or were they set by yourself, these goals?
Okay. When I sat down for the first time 11 years ago, I did this pretty much on my own. Now, to be real honest with you, it was a very liberating thing to set those and then sit down with my wife and share those with her. Because frankly, I've discovered that guys are a little deficit when it comes to communication sometimes. And so to me, it was a very comfortable venue to be able to sit down and talk to my wife about what's going on in my heart. And she always wants more of that. And so it was a good opportunity then 11 years ago to just sit down and talk about it. Now, and then again, in the ensuing years, we sat and talked about them again. When I reset them here just recently, I sat and I grabbed Norma and I said, okay, I'm interested in resetting my life goals, the things that I want to do sometime before I die, but I don't want this to be just me. I want this to be, what do we want to do? And so in resetting this year, I asked Norma to be much more involved in that process. Now, interestingly enough, what I found was that, and Norma, I'm not saying this is a universal case at all, but Norma does not have the future orientation that I do, and it's very, very difficult for her to set goals in the future. She really, she wants to be, she's an incredible woman. She wants to be a total support to me and wants to, and she listened to what I had to say and she said, okay, I am there. I love it. I love those three goals that we have. So that's kind of how that came down. Yeah, I agree with you. For those that may not have heard, if success is the feeling you get when you accomplish your priorities, you can project forward, I think is what you're saying, and say, okay, if I get to that, man, would that feel good? Would it feel good? I have to tell you, it feels good knowing that I've deposited 3 kids into society that are responsible human beings, that are interested in their own faith and their own walk with the living God. And that, to me, is, I feel great about that. And to your point, when I thought about it back then, yeah, that's the kind of, that gives you the why, frankly, for doing anything, right? If you understand your priorities, it becomes the why, and you can get excited about it even before you actually get there. It's a very, very motivational thing. Yeah. Okay.
So can you expound on expanding the scale, starting with the biggest piece?
All right, sure. It was simply a statement of magnitude. If this principle of setting goals and priorities and understanding what the problems are understanding what the opportunities are, if that process can apply across the board, the best results are always going to be obtained if you step back away from the micro and get to the macro. Get as large a scale possible. So in other words, Friedrich Flick, for instance, was concerned strictly about the business side of his life. That's all that mattered to him. And so consequently, he was very successful in the business aspect. He was a complete failure in the other aspects of his life because he didn't step back first and say, what do I want on my tombstone? Stephen Covey asked that question. What do you want on your tombstone? If you don't ask that question first, what do you want to accomplish with your life? You can't have the proper context for answering the question of what should my goals be within my business.
Great. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you. Enjoyed being here this morning. By the way, you really helped me with one of my major goals in life this morning, which is to invest in the lives of other people, to be less self-centered, which I am by nature, and to be more interested in other people. So thank you. You helped me.